Hello and welcome to our lesson 6-3, War in the Pacific. Today we're going to pick up with Japanese expansion. The Japanese Empire began expanding in the 1930s with successful campaigns against China. By 1941, they planned to expand their territories by capturing British and American possessions in the Pacific. This map is a quick demonstration of that Japanese expansion, showing our original Japanese islands and some that were taken before 1900. After 1905, the Japanese really were demonstrating their global power, pushing and taking some territory from Russia. 1910, taking over Korea. This was a big one, though, the capture of Manchuria in 1931, which really showed the rising power of Japan. All of this will be taken in World War II. So Japan is really a growing, rising power. Now, by 1942, Japan had taken the British possessions in Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Burma. That'd be these ones down here. And from the U.S., they had taken Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines. These are the Philippines. This is really because the British are distracted in Europe, right? They're fighting against Nazi Germany. They've been weakened in that fight, and Japan is able to take advantage of that weakness. Now, the U.S. strategy called for a focus in Europe. So the U.S. does withdraw from the Philippines. They don't really fight for the Philippines to keep it. This has been a colonial possession of theirs. They weren't particularly popular in the Philippines. The U.S. wasn't being nice to the Filipinos. So we withdraw to protect British Australia and use Australia as a base in the Pacific. When General Douglas MacArthur, this man right here, left the Philippines, he did promise that one day he would return. Now, captured American soldiers, because there were American soldiers left on the Philippines, they were captured and they were forced into a prison camp. They were treated very poorly during this stay in the prison camp. And the trip to the camp itself has been called the Bataan Death March for how many American troops died of exhaustion and dehydration and other illnesses during that trip to the prison camp. The Japanese did not treat prisoners well at all during this war. But the Allies do eventually fight back in the Pacific. In May 1942, the U.S. and Japan fought a battle called the Battle of the Coral Sea. This is when Japan tried to push their control and take Australia from the Allies. They wanted to control all of the Pacific, so that would mean controlling Australia as well. Now, neither side wins a decisive victory here. The Japanese fleet is not destroyed, but neither are they able to advance on Australia. This is the first significant setback for the Japanese in the Pacific. This is the first major battle that they did not win. And it becomes clear at this point that the Japanese may not be able to take Australia. They might be facing some difficulties in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway solidifies that. The Battle of Midway is the turning point of the Pacific War. This comes in June of 1942, a month after the Battle of the Coral Sea. Midway is a little island about halfway between California and Japan. So it sits right there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, hence the name Midway. And it's a great refilling spot for ships. So it's become an important naval and air possession. Now, the Japanese wanted to control this island as a stepping stone to attacking Hawaii. So they send most of their navy to this battle. But the U.S. fights back. And the Japanese fleet is largely destroyed in the Battle of Midway. They still have ships, they still have some aircraft, but it is now clear that the U.S. Navy will be dominant in the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese are no longer capable of a major attack, and for the rest of the war, will fight on the defensive. Battle of Midway, important. Remember that one. The U.S. offensive strategy now begins, and we call this strategy an island hopping approach, the island hopping strategy. Since the Japanese couldn't defend every single one of their islands, the U.S. had a major advantage in which we could pick and choose which islands to attack and leave the others behind, hopping along through the Pacific on our way to Japan. Japan has to defend every one of these islands. The US only has to attack a few. And since the Japanese have no navy, they can't then circle around and re-attack other American-held islands. So island hopping winds up being an incredibly successful strategy for the Allies. Additionally, the Japanese couldn't understand American radio signals. That's because the Americans used Navajo Indians. Navajo Indians were placed on all the command ships of the U.S. fleet, and they would simply speak to each other using the Navajo language. The Japanese had become very good at breaking American codes and finding out what American ships were saying to each other, but they could not figure out the Navajo language. It is too complex to be broken down and understood by those who are not taught at a very young age to speak and understand this language. So using Navajo Native Americans, the American fleet is able to easily communicate and coordinate attacks on Japanese islands and hop all the way to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, two islands right here and here that were within bombing distance of Japan itself. That is, bombers could take off from Iwo Jima, bomb Tokyo, and make it back without having to refuel. That makes attacks on mainland Japan possible. From Okinawa and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the U.S. uses firebombs to absolutely level Tokyo. Firebombs are the largest non-nuclear weapons ever used in combat, and they just annihilate this city. Over 100,000 people die in the firebombings of Tokyo, but Japan refuses to surrender. They're not going to give up. Now, the U.S. considers an invasion of mainland Japan, but they figure this invasion will cost over 200,000 American lives before the Japanese surrender. But we have an alternative. Back in the United States, a project called the Manhattan Project, know that, had just completed the world's first atomic bomb. We have atom bombs now. And on August 6th, 1945, the United States bomber, the Enola Gay, drops the first atomic weapon ever used in warfare on the city of Hiroshima in Japan. In an instant, one bomb killed 70,000 people. But the Japanese did not immediately surrender. And so a second bomb was dropped. This one hit the city of Nagasaki and killed 40,000 in an instant. Over 100,000 people killed from two bombs. The Japanese realized that the American strategy can just continue to pound these cities. The Japanese cannot stop this from happening. And so on August 14th, the Japanese Empire surrendered to the United States of America aboard the USS Missouri in the Pacific Ocean. This signaled the final end to World War II. I hope you learned something today. This was certainly a quick look at the Pacific War, but we were able to cover Japanese expansion, a couple of important battles, Coral Sea and Midway, the American island hopping strategy that allowed us to capture Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the firebombings of Tokyo, the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the end of the war. I hope you learned something again, and farewell.